Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Force flagship Vengeance as it drifted through the cold darkness beyond Pluto's orbit. The massive warship cut through space like a steel predator, its hull bristling with weapons that could crack moons in half. Jake had been patrolling these outer reaches for 3 months now, watching for threats that might come from the void between stars. His crew of 200 sailors worked with quiet efficiency around him, monitoring sensors and maintaining the ship's deadly arsenal. The bridge hummed with the soft sounds of electronics and life support systems. Through the main view screen, Jake could see the distant glow of Earth's sun, just another star among billions from this far out. He had served in the Earth Defense Force for 15 years, rising through the ranks during humanity's expansion into space. Most of his missions involved chasing pirates or escorting cargo ships, but lately there had been strange reports from the outer colonies. Ships going missing, entire mining stations falling silent, and whispers of something dark moving between. The Star's Lieutenant Amy Chun sat at her communications station, her fingers dancing across holographic controls as she monitored dozens of channels. She was one of the best communications officers in the fleet, able to pick up signals that others missed and decode transmissions that seemed impossible to crack. Amy had joined the Defense Force straight out of the Academy 5 years ago and had proven herself during the Titan Rebellion. Jake trusted her instincts completely when it came to communications and electronic warfare. The Vengeance was no ordinary ship. Built in the orbital shipyards above Mars, it represented the cutting edge of human military technology. Its hull was made from compressed titanium and carbon fiber composites that could withstand direct hits from fusion warheads. The ship carried enough firepower to level a city and had shields that could deflect most known weapons. But what made it truly dangerous was its crew, trained in the brutal art of human warfare that had evolved over thousands of years of conflict on Earth. Jake walked over to the tactical station where Lieutenant Commander Steve Martinez was reviewing patrol routes. Steve had served with Jake for over 8 years and was one of the finest tactical officers in the fleet. He understood how to use the Vengeance's weapons in ways that would surprise and overwhelm any enemy. The two men had fought together during the asteroid belt conflicts and had developed an almost telepathic understanding of each other's combat instincts. "Anything interesting on the sensors today?" Jake asked, looking over Steve's shoulder at the tactical display. The screen showed their patrol sector in 3 dimensions, with colored dots representing known objects and potential threats. Everything looked normal, just the usual collection of asteroids, comets, and debris that filled the outer solar system. "Nothing unusual, Captain," Steve replied. "We picked up some radiation from that comet we passed yesterday, but it's just normal cosmic background stuff. The outer colonies are all reporting normal status, and there's been no unusual traffic through the shipping lanes." Jake nodded but felt a nagging sense of unease. His instincts had kept him alive through dozens of battles and conflicts, and right now they were telling him that something was wrong. The universe felt too quiet, too peaceful. In his experience that usually meant trouble was coming, Amy suddenly straightened at her station, her eyes widening as she focused on something only she could hear through her headset. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange on the deep space channels. It's heavily encrypted and coming from way out beyond the heliopause. The signal is weak, but it's definitely artificial." Jake moved quickly to Amy's station, his combat instincts taking over. "Can you clean it up?" "Get me whatever you can from that transmission?" Amy's fingers flew over her controls as she applied various filters and decoding algorithms to the signal. The bridge crew gathered around her station, sensing that something important was happening. For several minutes, the only sounds were the soft beeps and hums of the communications equipment as Amy worked her technical magic. "Got it," she said finally, her voice tight with concentration. "It's coming through now, but, Captain, this is unlike anything I've ever seen. The encryption is incredibly advanced, more sophisticated than anything in our databases. And the language ... it's not human." Jake felt his blood run cold. First contact with alien intelligence had always been a possibility, but humanity had been expanding into space for 50 years without finding any trace of other intelligent life. Most scientists had concluded that humans were alone in the galaxy, or at least in this part of it. "Put it through the speakers," Jake ordered, his voice steady despite the implications of what they were hearing, the bridge filled with a series of sounds that were clearly not human. There were musical tones mixed with what sounded like electronic static, but underneath it all was something that chilled Jake to the bone. It sounded like screaming, like creatures in terrible pain and fear calling out for help across the vast emptiness of space. Amy worked frantically at her station, running the signal through every translation program and linguistic analysis tool the Vengeance carried. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, her face went pale as the computer finally managed to decode portions of the message. "Captain," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the alien sounds still coming from the speakers. "I'm getting fragments of the translation now. It's a distress call, but not just any distress call. It's from something called the Galactic Council, and they're begging for help. They say something called the Devourers has awakened and is consuming entire star systems. They've heard about Earth and human military capabilities, and they want our help." Jake stared at the communication station as the full implications of the message sank in. Humanity was not alone in the universe, but their first contact was not the peaceful meeting that diplomats and scientists had always imagined. Instead, it was a desperate plea for military assistance from civilizations that were apparently being destroyed by something even more dangerous. The alien voices continued to pour from the speakers, and even without understanding the words, Jake could hear the terror and desperation in them. These were the sounds of civilizations facing extinction, calling out to Earth as their last hope for survival. "Set course for Earth immediately," Jake ordered, his training taking over even, as his mind struggled to process what they had discovered. "Maximum speed, and Amy, keep monitoring that signal. I want every word decoded and analyzed before we reach home. If someone out there needs our help against something called the Devourers, then Earth Defense Command needs to know about it right now." The Vengeance's engines roared to life as the massive warship turned toward home, carrying news that would change humanity's place in the universe forever. Admiral Lisa Parker stood in the main briefing room at Earth Defense Command headquarters, watching as the holographic display showed the decoded alien transmission for the 5th time. The massive underground facility buried beneath the Colorado mountains hummed with activity as staff officers and analysts worked around the clock to understand what humanity had just discovered. Lisa had commanded Earth's military forces for 7 years, and in all that time she had never faced anything like this situation. Captain Jake Morrison sat at the conference table along with several other fleet commanders who had been called. And for this emergency meeting, Captain Ryan Blake commanded the heavy cruiser Iron Wolf and was known throughout the fleet for his aggressive tactics and fearless leadership. Captain Nicole Carter led the battle carrier Storm Rider and had earned her reputation during the pirate wars in the Outer System. These were some of humanity's finest military minds, and Lisa knew she would need every one of them for whatever was coming. The holographic display flickered and changed to show a 3-dimensional map of nearby star systems. Red dots marked the locations where the alien transmission had originated, while blue dots showed the positions of Earth's colonies and outposts. The distances were staggering, with some of the red dots located hundreds of light years away from Earth. Whatever was happening out there was happening on a scale that dwarfed anything humans had ever experienced. Dr. Sarah Williams, Earth's leading expert on alien linguistics, stepped forward to address the group. She had spent the last 18 hours working with the most advanced computer systems on Earth to decode and translate the alien message. Her face showed the strain of those long hours, but her voice was clear and steady as she began to explain what they had learned. The transmission came from multiple sources across what appears to be a galactic government of some kind, Dr. Williams said, pointing to various red dots on the map. They call themselves the Galactic Council, and based on what we can understand from their language, They represent hundreds of different alien species scattered across this part of the galaxy. The message is a formal request for military assistance, specifically requesting help from Earth and human forces. Captain Blake leaned forward in his chair, his expression skeptical. Why would aliens we've never met before ask us for help? How do they even know we exist? Dr. Williams touched a control, and the display changed to show fragments of text in both alien symbols and English translation. That's where it gets interesting. According to their message, they've been monitoring our radio and television broadcasts for decades. They know about our history, our wars, and our military capabilities. But here's the strange part. They seem to be afraid of us. Admiral Parker raised an eyebrow. Afraid of us? These are civilizations that can travel between stars, and they're afraid of humans who barely made it to their own moon 50 years ago? The translation is still incomplete, but from what we can understand, most alien species in the galaxy evolved beyond physical conflict millions of years ago, Dr. Williams continued. They settled their disputes through negotiation and economic pressure. War, as humans understand it, simply doesn't exist in their culture anymore. They view our military history with a mixture of fascination and horror. Captain Carter spoke up from her position at the table. What exactly are these devourers that they're so afraid of? The display changed again to show what appeared to be sensor readings and battle reports from various alien sources. The data was fragmentary and hard to understand, but it painted a picture of something vast and terrible moving through space. Ships the size of small moons, weapons that could crack planets, and a hunger that seemed to consume everything in its path. The Devourers appear to be an ancient species that has been dormant for thousands of years, Dr. Williams explained. According to the alien records, they awakened recently and began consuming entire star systems. Their ships are biological, grown rather than built, and they seem to feed on the energy of living worlds. Every civilization that has tried to fight them has been destroyed within days. Jake Morrison had been quiet throughout the briefing, but now he stood and walked over to the holographic display. He studied the tactical information for several minutes before turning back to face the group. How many star systems have they destroyed so far? Dr. Williams consulted her tablet. Based on the reports we've been able to decode, at least 12 systems have gone completely dark in the last 6 months. That represents billions of lives and entire civilizations that no longer exist. The room fell silent as the magnitude of the threat became clear. These were not raiders or pirates that could be negotiated with or driven off. The Devourers were something far worse, a force of nature that consumed everything in its path without mercy or hesitation. Admiral Parker walked over to stand beside Jake, studying the tactical display with the eye of a military professional. What do the aliens want from us specifically? What kind of help are they asking for? They want our warships and our military commanders, Dr. Williams replied. According to their message, they've analyzed our military history and believe that human tactical thinking might be the key to stopping the Devourers. They specifically mention our use of what they call chaotic warfare and psychological combat as strategies they've never encountered before. Captain Blake let out a short laugh. Chaotic warfare? Is that what they call it when we use our brains instead of flying in straight lines and shooting at each other? From their perspective, human. Military tactics are completely unpredictable, Dr. Williams said. We use deception, misdirection, psychological warfare, and strategies that change constantly based on circumstances. Most alien species apparently fight in very formal, predictable patterns that follow ancient traditions. The Devourers have learned to counter those patterns, but they've never faced anything like human military doctrine. Admiral Parker turned to face her fleet commanders. Gentlemen and lady, we're looking at a situation where Earth might be the galaxy's last hope against an enemy that has already destroyed civilizations far more advanced than ours. The question is, are we ready to take on that responsibility? Captain Carter was the first to respond. Admiral, with respect, do we really have a choice? If these Devourers are consuming entire star systems, how long before they reach Earth? Better to fight them out there with allies than wait for them to come here, Jake nodded in agreement. The aliens are right about one thing: human warfare is different from anything they've seen. We fight dirty, we break rules, and we never give up. If that's what it takes to stop these things, then that's what we'll do. Admiral Parker looked around the room at her commanders and saw the same determination in all their faces. These were warriors who had spent their lives preparing for the unknown, and now the unknown had found them. Admiral Lisa Parker stood in the command center of the Luna military shipyard, watching through the massive viewing windows as humanity's deadliest warships prepared for a mission unlike any in their history. The shipyard orbited Earth's moon and stretched for dozens of kilometers in every direction, its construction bays filled with vessels that represented the peak of human military engineering. Today, these ships would be loaded with weapons and equipment designed specifically to fight an enemy that had already destroyed civilizations far older than humanity. Captain Danny Rodriguez walked along the hull of his ship, the stealth destroyer Shadow Strike, as engineering teams made final modifications to its systems. The Shadow Strike was painted in special coating that absorbed sensor waves and made it nearly invisible to most detection methods. Danny had commanded the ship for 3 years and knew every bolt and wire in its construction. The ship was built for hit-and-run attacks, sneaking close to enemy targets and striking without warning before disappearing back into the darkness of space. Engineer Tony Walsh supervised a team of technicians as they installed new weapon systems. On the massive battlecruiser Thunder God, Tony had designed most of the modifications himself, working with barely any sleep for the past week to create weapons that could penetrate the biological armor of Devourer ships. The new plasma cannons could fire concentrated bursts of energy hot enough to melt through solid steel, while the kinetic bombardment systems launched projectiles at speeds that could crack asteroids in half. Captain Helen Brooks stood on the bridge of the Thunder God, reviewing tactical data and weapons specifications with her senior officers. The Thunder God was one of the largest warships in Earth's fleet, measuring over 800 meters from bow to stern and carrying enough firepower to destroy a small fleet. Helen had earned her command through 15 years of service and had proven herself during the colony wars on the Outer Rim. She understood better than most how to use overwhelming force to break enemy morale and scatter their formations. The shipyard buzzed with activity as supply ships delivered ammunition, spare parts, and provisions for the coming mission. Dock workers loaded torpedo warheads filled with antimatter charges while technicians calibrated targeting systems and defensive shields. Every ship in the fleet was being prepared for combat against an enemy whose capabilities were still largely unknown. The only certainty was that the Devourers had destroyed every force sent against them so far. Admiral Parker received regular updates from her staff as each ship reported its readiness status. The Iron Wolf had completed its weapons upgrades and was loading additional armor plating designed to withstand biological acid attacks. The Storm Rider was taking on fighter squadrons equipped with new electronic warfare systems that could disrupt alien communications. Every vessel was being customized based on what little intelligence Earth had gathered about Devourer tactics and technology. Tony Walsh finished installing the last of the experimental weapons on the Thunder God and moved to the next ship on his list. His team had worked around the clock to develop new strategies for fighting biological ships that could heal damage and adapt to enemy attacks. The solution had come from studying Earth's own military history, particularly the use of chemical and biological weapons during ancient conflicts. If the Devourer ships were truly alive, then they could be poisoned, infected, or diseased just like any other living creature. The new weapons included viral torpedoes that could infect enemy ships, with computer viruses designed to disrupt their biological functions, acid rounds that would eat through organic armor and spread throughout the target's structure, plasma bombs that burned hot enough to sterilize large sections of a living ship and prevent it from healing. Most importantly, psychological warfare, devices that could broadcast sounds and signals designed to cause panic and confusion. Among biological entities, Captain Rodriguez reviewed the tactical plans with his senior officers aboard the Shadow Strike. Their mission would be to scout ahead of the main fleet and gather intelligence on Devourer positions and capabilities. The stealth destroyer would use its advanced sensors to map enemy formations while remaining undetected, then relay that information back to the fleet commanders. If the opportunity arose, they would also conduct sabotage missions against isolated Devourer vessels. The Shadow Strike's weapons had been modified for maximum psychological impact rather than pure destructive power. The ship carried sonic weapons that could broadcast terrifying sounds across multiple frequencies, designed to cause fear and disorientation in biological entities. Holographic projectors could create false images of massive Earth fleets to confuse enemy sensors and make small forces appear much larger than they actually were. Admiral Parker walked through the shipyard's main corridor, observing the preparations and talking with ship captains about their readiness. Every conversation reinforced her growing confidence that humanity might actually have a chance against the Devourers. Human military doctrine emphasized adaptability, creativity, and the willingness to use any advantage available. These were qualities that had served Earth well during centuries of conflict and would hopefully prove effective against an alien enemy. Dr. Patricia Lee worked in the shipyard's research laboratory, developing new tactical doctrines based on humanity's military history. She had studied every major conflict from ancient times to the present day, looking for strategies and techniques that might work against biological spacecraft. The key insight was that most human military success came from doing the unexpected, using tactics that enemies could not predict or counter effectively. The research team had identified several uniquely human approaches to warfare that might surprise the Devourers. Ramming attacks where ships deliberately collided with enemy vessels. Kamikaze missions where crews sacrificed themselves to destroy larger targets. Guerrilla tactics that involved hiding among debris fields and striking without warning. Most importantly, the human tendency to fight hardest when facing impossible odds and certain defeat. Captain Helen Brooks received the final weapons upgrade reports for the Thunder God and smiled grimly as she reviewed the specifications. Her ship now carried enough firepower to level a continent and had been equipped with experimental weapons that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. The plasma cannons could fire continuously for hours without overheating, while the kinetic bombardment system could launch hundreds of projectiles per minute at targets across vast distances. The preparation phase was nearly complete, and soon Earth's deadliest ships would depart for their first encounter with an enemy that had already conquered half the galaxy. Admiral Parker knew that humanity's survival might depend on their ability to fight in ways that no other species had ever imagined, using tactics that would shock and terrify enemies accustomed to predictable civilized warfare. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Vengeance as the human fleet emerged from the artificial wormhole into the Centauri system. The sight that greeted them was unlike anything in their worst nightmares. Massive biological ships, each one larger than Earth's biggest cities, moved through space like living creatures swimming through an ocean of stars. Their hulls pulsed with veins of sickly green light, and tentacle-like appendages reached out to wrap around planets and moons, draining them of all life and energy. The Devourer fleet had already consumed 2 of the system's 4 planets, leaving behind only dead husks of rock floating in space. The remaining worlds showed clear signs of the feeding process beginning, with their atmospheres being slowly stripped away and their surfaces turning gray and lifeless. Local defense ships from the Centauri colonies fled in terror as the biological monstrosities pursued them, their organic weapons firing streams of acidic plasma that dissolved anything they touched. Lieutenant Amy Chun worked frantically at her communications station, trying to establish contact with the fleeing alien vessels. The panic in their transmissions was clear even through the language barriers, as centuries-old civilizations watched their homeworlds being devoured by creatures that seemed to come from the darkest depths of space. Amy managed to decode fragments of their desperate calls for help, learning that the Devourers had arrived only 3 days ago but had already overwhelmed all local defenses. Lieutenant Commander Steve Martinez studied the tactical display with growing amazement at the sheer size of the enemy fleet. The largest Devourer ships measured over 50 kilometers in length and appeared to be living creatures rather than constructed vessels. Their hulls breathed and flexed like muscle tissue, while bioluminescent patches along their sides pulsed with alien rhythms. Smaller escort vessels swarmed around the giants like parasites, each one still larger than Earth's biggest warships. "Captain, I'm reading over 200 enemy vessels in the system," Steve reported, his voice steady despite the overwhelming odds they faced. "The big ones appear to be the planetary feeders, while the smaller ships are providing protection and conducting hunting operations against the fleeing defenders." Jake studied the enemy formations and noticed something that gave him hope. The Devourers moved in predictable patterns, following what appeared to be instinctual behaviors rather than tactical planning. The larger ships focused entirely on feeding, while the smaller ones chased prey in straight lines without any attempt at coordination or strategy. They fought like animals rather than soldiers, which meant they could be surprised and confused by human tactics. "All ships, this is Morrison," Jake announced over the fleet communications channel. "We're looking at an enemy that's used to prey running away from them. They've never faced predators before, so we're going to teach them what it feels like to be hunted. Implement attack pattern Morrison 7 and prepare for immediate engagement." Captain Ryan Blake acknowledged the order from his position aboard the Iron Wolf. Attack pattern Morrison 7 was one of the most aggressive and unconventional tactics in the Human Military Handbook, designed to create maximum chaos and confusion among enemy forces. Instead of forming traditional battle lines, the human ships would split up and attack from multiple directions simultaneously. Using the system's asteroid fields and debris clouds for cover, the human fleet scattered like a pack of wolves, each ship moving to predetermined positions around the Devourer formation. Captain Nicole Carter led the Stormrider toward the outer edge of the system, where she could launch fighter squadrons to harass enemy communications and sensor networks. Captain Danny Rodriguez took the Shadow Strike deep into the asteroid belt, where his stealth systems would hide him until the perfect moment to strike. The Devourers initially ignored the approaching human ships, apparently dismissing them as just another group of fleeing prey animals. This was exactly what Jake had hoped for, as it gave his forces time to reach their attack positions without facing organized resistance. The biological ships continued their feeding operations on the remaining planets, completely focused on their instinctual drive to consume rather than defending themselves. Captain Helen Brooks positioned the Thunder God behind a cluster of large asteroids, using them as cover while she prepared her most devastating weapons. The massive battlecruiser's plasma cannons charged to full power, while kinetic bombardment systems loaded projectiles designed to penetrate biological armor. Helen had studied the intelligence reports about Devourer ship construction and knew that their living hulls might be resistant to energy weapons but could still be damaged by physical impacts. The first phase of the attack began when Captain Rodriguez emerged from the asteroid field in the Shadow Strike, appearing directly behind one of the smaller Devourer escort vessels. The stealth destroyer opened fire with every weapon it carried, including the new sonic devices that broadcast terrifying sounds across multiple frequencies. The biological ship writhed in apparent pain as the sonic attacks disrupted its nervous system, causing it to lose control and crash into a nearby asteroid. This unexpected assault from an invisible enemy caused immediate panic among the Devourer fleet. The biological ships began emitting distress calls that sounded like the screams of wounded animals, their bioluminescent patches flashing in patterns that clearly indicated fear and confusion. They had never encountered prey that fought back with such vicious effectiveness, and their instinctual responses were completely inadequate for dealing with coordinated military tactics. Captain Blake chose this moment of confusion to launch the Iron Wolf's assault on the main Devourer formation. The heavy cruiser emerged from behind a moon at maximum speed, its hull blazing with weapon fire as it charged directly toward the largest enemy vessel. The ship's speakers broadcast human war songs and battle cries, adding psychological warfare to the physical assault. The massive Devourer ship tried to turn its feeding appendages toward this new threat, but the Iron Wolf was moving too fast and striking too hard to be stopped. The Iron Wolf smashed through the biological ship's outer hull like a spear through flesh, its reinforced bow cutting deep into the creature's vital organs. Before emerging from the other side in a shower of alien blood and tissue, the massive Devourer convulsed and died, its bioluminescent patches fading to darkness as it drifted lifeless through space. Captain Carter's fighter squadrons struck next, swarming over the smaller Devourer ships like angry hornets. The human pilots had been trained in tactics that no alien species had ever encountered, using kamikaze attacks and coordinated strikes that overwhelmed the biological vessel's defensive capabilities. Several enemy ships were destroyed within minutes, while others fled in terror from an enemy they could not understand or predict. News of the human victory at Centauri spread across the galaxy faster than anyone had expected. Captain Nicole Carter stood on the bridge of the storm, rider as alien ships from dozens of different species began arriving at the rally point near the edge of human space. These were civilizations that had been fleeing from the Devourers for months, running from system to system as their ancient enemies consumed everything behind them. Now they came seeking alliance with the strange warriors from Earth who had achieved the impossible by actually defeating a Devourer fleet in open combat. The alien ships were unlike anything humans had ever seen. Some looked like giant crystals that sparkled with internal light, while others resembled enormous flowers made of metal and energy. A few appeared to be living creatures themselves, but these were clearly different from the biological horrors of the Devourer fleet. These beings had evolved beyond the need for physical violence, creating beautiful vessels designed for exploration and peaceful contact rather than warfare. Captain Carter worked with her communications officer to establish contact with the alien fleet commanders. The translation process was slow and difficult, but gradually the humans began to understand the scope of what they were dealing with. The Galactic Council represented over 300 different species spread across thousands of star systems, and all of them had been helpless against the Devourer advance until humanity had shown them that these ancient predators could be beaten. Admiral Lisa Parker arrived at the rally point aboard her flagship just as the first joint human-alien strategy meeting was beginning. She had spent the journey from Earth studying everything the aliens could tell them about Devourer tactics and capabilities. The picture that emerged was both encouraging and terrifying. The biological ships were indeed powerful and nearly unstoppable when facing conventional military forces, but they had several weaknesses that human tactics could exploit. The aliens explained that Devourers operated on pure instinct rather than intelligent planning. They attacked in predictable patterns and always chose the easiest targets first, which meant they could be lured into traps and ambush. Their biological nature made them vulnerable to certain types of weapons and tactics that the peaceful galactic civilizations had never developed. Most importantly, they had never encountered an enemy that fought with the creativity and viciousness that humans brought to every battle. General Kevin Murphy joined the meeting via quantum communication link from Earth, where he was coordinating the production of new weapons and ships for the expanding war effort. Kevin had spent 30 years studying military history and had identified dozens of human tactical innovations that might work against the Devourers. Everything from ancient siege warfare techniques to modern special operations could be adapted for use in space combat against biological enemies. Dr. Patricia Lee presented her analysis of human military advantages to the assembled alien commanders. She explained how human warfare had evolved through thousands of years of conflict, creating a military doctrine based on deception, surprise, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. The aliens listened with a mixture of fascination and horror as she described tactics like scorched earth policies, guerrilla warfare, and the human tendency to fight harder when facing certain defeat. Captain Carter began implementing these new tactics during raids against isolated Devourer formations. The Storm Rider would approach enemy positions using conventional flight patterns that looked like fleeing prey, then suddenly reveal hidden weapons and attack with overwhelming force. The biological ships were completely unprepared for prey. That turned into predators, and many of them were destroyed before they could adapt to the new threat. The alien allies proved surprisingly effective once they learned to follow human tactical leadership. Their advanced technology and energy weapons complemented human strategies perfectly, while their peaceful nature made them eager to learn aggressive tactics they had never considered before. The crystal ships could focus starlight into devastating beam weapons, while the flower-like vessels could generate gravity fields that crushed enemy ships like insects. Captain Ryan Blake led a combined human-alien task force in a series of hit-and-run attacks that slowly began pushing back the Devourer. Advance. The Iron Wolf worked alongside alien cruisers to strike at enemy supply lines and communication networks, using tactics that the biological ships could not predict or counter. They would attack from multiple directions simultaneously, retreat when the enemy responded, then strike again from completely different positions. The key to success was keeping the Devourers confused and off balance. Human commanders learned to change their tactics constantly, never using the same approach. Twice in a row, they would use asteroid fields as cover for ambush attacks, then switch to long-range bombardment from empty space. Sometimes they would attack in large formations. Other times they would send single ships on suicide missions that caused maximum psychological damage. Dr. Patricia Lee worked with alien scientists to develop new weapons specifically designed to exploit Devourer weaknesses. They created viral bombs that could infect biological ships with diseases that disrupted their nervous systems, sonic weapons that broadcast frequencies painful to biological ears. Most effective were psychological warfare devices that projected images and sounds designed to trigger instinctual fear responses in predatory creatures. The Devourers began showing signs of confusion and hesitation as the human-lead alliance continued its unconventional campaign. The biological ships started avoiding certain areas of space and retreating when faced with determined resistance instead of pressing their attacks. For the first time in their species' history, they were encountering prey that was more dangerous than they were, and their instinctual responses were completely inadequate for dealing with intelligent, tactical planning. Captain Jake Morrison coordinated fleet movements from his position aboard the Vengeance, which had become the unofficial flagship of the Human-Alien Alliance. He worked with alien commanders to plan larger operations that would liberate entire star systems from Devourer control. The key was to move fast and strike hard before the biological ships could adapt to their tactics, using the element of surprise. To maximum advantage, the war was far from over, but for the first time since the Devourers had awakened, the galaxy had hope. Human military doctrine was proving effective against an enemy that had seemed unstoppable, and the alliance between Earth and the Galactic Council was growing stronger with each victory. The biological horrors that had terrorized countless civilizations were finally facing opponents who understood how to hunt the hunters and turn predators into prey. General Murphy began planning for the next phase of the campaign, which would involve direct assaults on major Devourer strongholds. The aliens provided intelligence about enemy positions and capabilities, while humans developed the tactical plans that would drive the biological ships from system after system until they were forced back to wherever they had come from originally. Admiral Lisa Parker stood on the bridge of the Super Dreadnought, Earth's fury, as the massive combined fleet approached the Devourer homeworld deep in the galaxy's core region. The ship was the largest and most powerful vessel humanity had ever built, stretching over 2 kilometers from bow to stern and carrying enough firepower to shatter moons. Around her, thousands of human and alien warships moved in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with weapons that had been specifically designed to fight biological enemies. The journey to reach this moment had taken 6 months of continuous warfare across dozens of star systems. Human commanders had led alien allies in battle after battle, slowly pushing the Devourers back toward their place of origin while learning more about their enemy with each encounter. The biological ships were indeed ancient beyond imagination, and their homeworld was a nightmare realm where living spacecraft grew like fruit on massive organic trees that stretched between planets. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the assault. Fleet's advance forces from his position aboard the Vengeance. His ship had been upgraded with the most advanced weapons and armor that human technology could provide, but even so, the odds they faced were staggering. Intelligence reports suggested that over 10,000 Devourer ships were defending their homeworld, including massive biofortresses that had been growing for millions of years. The Devourer home system was unlike anything the human or alien forces had ever encountered. Instead of normal planets orbiting a star, they found a collection of living worlds connected by enormous organic structures that pulsed with sickly light. The planets themselves appeared to be giant creatures, their surfaces covered with cities that looked more like infected wounds than any kind of civilization. Rivers of glowing fluid flowed between the worlds, carrying nutrients and information through the organic network. Captain Ryan Blake positioned the Iron Wolf at the head of the main assault formation, his ship loaded with experimental weapons that had been developed specifically for this final battle. The heavy cruiser carried viral torpedoes that could infect entire sections of the Devourer network, spreading like disease through their biological communications systems. These weapons had never been tested on such a large scale, but human military doctrine emphasized taking calculated risks when facing impossible odds. The first phase of the attack began when Captain Danny Rodriguez led his stealth squadron deep into the enemy system using routes that avoided the main defensive positions. The Shadow Strike and its sister ships moved through the dark spaces between the living worlds, their hulls coated with substances that masked their signatures from biological sensors. Their mission was to plant explosive charges on key communication nodes and disrupt the Devourer Coordination Network. Admiral Parker watched the tactical display as the stealth ships reached their targets and began their sabotage operations. Explosions bloomed throughout the Devourer network as communication links were severed and coordination centers were destroyed. The biological defenders immediately began responding to these attacks, but their movements were confused and uncoordinated without their central nervous system functioning properly. Captain Nicole Carter launched the first wave of fighter attacks from the Storm Rider, sending hundreds of small craft swarming toward the outer defensive positions. The human pilots had been trained in suicide tactics that no alien species had ever imagined, and they drove their ships directly into the most vital enemy targets without hesitation. Each fighter carried enough explosive power to cripple a Devourer cruiser, and the pilots were prepared to sacrifice themselves to ensure mission success. The main assault began when Captain Helen Brooks opened fire with the Thunder God's full arsenal. The massive battlecruiser unleashed streams of plasma and kinetic projectiles that tore through the biological defenders like bullets through flesh. The Thunder God had been equipped with weapons that burned so hot they could sterilize entire sections of living ships, preventing them from healing and regenerating as they normally would during battle. Captain Blake led the Iron Wolf in its signature ramming attack, driving the heavy cruiser directly through the heart of a massive biofortress that had been defending one of the living planets. The ship's reinforced hull carved through organic armor and vital organs while broadcasting psychological warfare signals that caused panic throughout the Devourer network. The fortress convulsed and died as the Iron Wolf emerged from its other side. Trailing alien blood and tissue, the Devourers fought back with desperate fury, launching waves of biological fighters and deploying weapons that could dissolve metal and flesh with equal effectiveness. Their ships moved like living creatures in pain, writhing and screaming as they died under the relentless human assault. But for every Devourer vessel destroyed, 10 more seemed to emerge from the organic breeding facilities hidden throughout the system. Admiral Parker realized that conventional tactics would not be enough to win this battle. The Devourers had too many ships and could replace their losses faster than the human-alien alliance could destroy them. She made the decision that would define humanity's place in galactic history, ordering all ships to implement the final protocol that had been developed specifically for this moment. Captain Morrison received the order and immediately began coordinating the most desperate and insane military operation in human history. Every ship in the fleet would abandon conventional tactics and attack the Devourer homeworld directly, using ramming speed and suicide attacks to penetrate the enemy's inner defenses. The goal was not to destroy every enemy ship but to reach the central breeding facility and plant nuclear charges that would sterilize the entire system. The human ships charged toward the living worlds with engines at maximum power, their hulls glowing red-hot from the strain of emergency acceleration. Alien allies followed behind them, finally understanding what it meant to fight with human determination and courage. The fleet smashed through defensive lines that had protected the Devourer homeworld for millions of years, trading ship for ship until space was filled with the wreckage of both sides. Captain Carter piloted the Stormrider on a collision course with the largest of the living planets, her ship loaded with antimatter charges that would burn like a miniature star when they detonated. She broadcast final messages to her crew and her family back on Earth as the biological world grew larger in her viewscreen, its surface covered with defensive weapons that fired desperately at her approaching ship. The final moments of the battle were chaos beyond description as human and alien ships crashed into the Devourer homeworld from every direction simultaneously. Nuclear fires bloomed across the surface of living planets while biological defenders screamed and died in the void of space. The organic network that had connected the Devourer civilization for millions of years began to collapse as vital nodes were destroyed and communication links were severed forever. Admiral Parker watched from the Earth's fury as the enemy homeworld began to die, its surface turning from sickly green to charred black as the fires spread. The surviving Devourer ships fled into deep space rather than face complete extinction, their ancient empire finally broken by an enemy they had never understood or anticipated. Humanity had won the war through courage, creativity, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for victory.